I drove to my parents' house on a cold Saturday morning with my 11-year-old daughter in the passenger seat. Her name was Hannah Morgan, and she held her music bag like it was precious. We were going over for a simple reason. She needed practice time, and the good cello was stored there. The instrument was old and beautiful, and it had been in our family for generations. My great-grandmother, Evelyn Harper, always called it a legacy piece, and she made it clear it belonged to Hannah. My parents insisted it was safer in their music room, so we kept it there, and Hannah practiced at their house each week. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed stacks of lumber near the garage and fresh tools by the back door. The backyard gate was open, and the ground looked torn up, like someone had been digging. My mother, Denise Harper, met us at the door with a bright smile that felt too tight. My father, Stanley Harper, stood behind her, quiet, and he avoided my eyes. Inside, the air smelled like paint and sawdust and something newly installed. Hannah walked straight toward the music room, focused and excited, because she treated practice like a promise. I followed her down the hall, already uneasy, because the house sounded different, louder, busier, wrong. The music room door was open, and the corner where the cello case always rested was empty. Hannah froze, her shoulders lifting like her body was bracing for impact. She asked where it was, in a small, careful voice, and my chest tightened. I checked the closet, the shelves, and behind the piano bench, even though I already knew it would not be there. Hannah looked up at me, searching my face for an answer I did not have. I asked my mother where the cello was, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. Denise waved a hand, like it was not important, and said they made a change. Stanley cleared his throat and said it was time for something new around here. I asked again, slower this time, and my mother finally said they sold it. She said they got a great price, and the money would be used for family improvements. Hannah stared at her, eyes wide, then looked at me like she might fall apart. Heat rose in my throat, and my hands started to shake. I asked who bought it, and how they could sell something that was not theirs. Denise said I should not overreact, and Stanley said it was only an instrument. Then my sister Brittany Harper walked in smiling and asked if we liked the backyard project. I did not answer, because in that moment, I realized this was not an accident. It was a decision, and my child was the one paying for it. Alyssa Morgan felt her face go hot, then cold, all in one breath. She asked Denise Harper what great price meant, and Denise answered like she was proud. Denise said the cello sold fast, and the buyer paid $87,000. Hannah Morgan made a small sound, like air leaving her chest, and her eyes filled before she could stop it. Alyssa asked who the buyer was and where the money went, and Stanley Harper finally spoke. He said they were improving the property and that the whole family would benefit. Alyssa looked past him, toward the back windows, and she understood why the yard was torn up. There were markers in the soil and a wide rectangle of fresh dirt, like the outline of a future pool. Brittany Harper appeared again, cheerful and confident, and she talked about summer and parties, and how Jackson Harper would love it. Alyssa asked if they used Hannah money to build a pool for Brittany Child, and Brittany did not deny it. She said it was an investment, and Hannah would enjoy it too. Hannah wiped her cheeks fast, embarrassed to cry in front of people who did not care. Alyssa stepped closer to her parents and lowered her voice, because she refused to give them a show. She said the cello was not theirs, and they knew it. She said Evelyn Harper made it clear, for years, that the instrument belonged to Hannah. Denise rolled her eyes and said, Evelyn is old-fashioned, and nobody needs a fancy antique cello for a child. Stanley added that Hannah could rent a different instrument, and everything would be fine. Alyssa looked at Hannah and saw a girl trying to stay polite while her heart broke. Alyssa asked for the bill of sale, the buyer name, and the payment record. Denise said they did not have to show her anything because the cello was in their house. Alyssa said being in their house did not make it their property. Brittany tried to laugh, then asked Alyssa why she was being so dramatic. Alyssa did not raise her voice. She asked one question, slow and clear. Alyssa asked if they would have sold it, If Evelyn Harper had been standing in this room, the silence that followed was the answer. Alyssa took Hannah's hand and told her they were leaving now. On the drive home, Hannah stared out the window, quiet and stiff. Alyssa promised her, in a calm, steady voice, that they would handle this, and the truth would not be ignored. At home, Alyssa Morgan made cocoa for Hannah Morgan, even though neither of them drank much. Hannah sat at the table, shoulders hunched, and kept saying she was sorry, like she caused the problem by loving her instrument. Alyssa told her to stop apologizing, and she meant it. Alyssa stepped into the hallway, pulled out her phone, and called Evelyn Harper. Evelyn answered on the second ring, and her voice was sharp with concern. Alyssa explained what happened, slowly, leaving out nothing, because she knew half-truth would help nobody. She said Denise Harper and Stanley Harper sold the cello and used the money for a backyard project connected to Brittany Harper. There was a pause. Then Evelyn let out one quiet breath, controlled and heavy. Evelyn asked the sale amount, and Alyssa said $87,000. Evelyn did not gasp. She did not cry. She did not swear. She asked if Alyssa had the buyer information, and Alyssa admitted she did not, because Denise refused to share. Evelyn told Alyssa to write down everything she remembered. The lumber, the smell of paint, the dug-up yard, the words they used, and the way Brittany smiled. Evelyn said she had prepared for this kind of selfishness, even if she wished she did not have to. Alyssa asked what she meant, and Evelyn said the cello was protected. Evelyn said she placed the instrument in a trust for Hannah Morgan with clear documents. Evelyn said she was the trustee, and Hannah was the beneficiary, which meant nobody else had the right to sell it. Alyssa felt her knees go weak, because relief can hit like shock. Evelyn told Alyssa to stay calm and stay quiet, and do not warn anyone. Evelyn said she would call her attorney, Grant Wallace, and they would take the next steps. Alyssa returned to the kitchen and sat beside Hannah. She told Hannah that Evelyn Harper was helping, and that the cello was not just a family story. It was legally protected. Hannah blinked hard, trying not to hope too fast. Alyssa said they would fight for what was hers, and they would do it the right way. That night, Hannah went to bed holding her music notebook, like it could keep her safe. Alyssa stayed up, writing a timeline, saving messages, and preparing for the moment her parents realized they could not talk their way out of this. A few days later, Denise Harper hosted a backyard gathering like nothing happened. Brittany Harper invited friends, and she acted like the house was a showcase. Alyssa Morgan came only because she needed to see the project with her own eyes, and because she wanted to learn what they were bragging about. Hannah Morgan stayed home with a neighbor, because Alyssa refused to let her walk into that house again. When Alyssa arrived, the pool area was already taking shape, with workers moving fast, and a large sign showing the design. Denise greeted Alyssa with a smile meant for an audience, and Stanley stood beside her, stiff and watchful. Brittany pointed at the construction like it was proof of success, and she said Jackson Harper will have the best summer. Alyssa looked around at the expensive materials and felt the insult sharpen. Denise told guests they finally made improvements, and she hinted that Alyssa should be grateful, because the family home was being upgraded. Alyssa asked, quietly, if they told anyone where the money came from. Denise said Alyssa should stop being negative, and Stanley said they were tired of being judged. Brittany stepped close and said Hannah would get over it, and besides, Hannah does not even play that well yet. Alyssa felt her hands curl, then she relaxed them on purpose. She reminded herself that anger without strategy only feeds people like this. Alyssa asked one more time for the buyer name, and Denise refused again, smiling wider. Denise said it is done, and Alyssa cannot undo it. Alyssa nodded once, not because she agreed, but because she was done arguing. She left the gathering early and drove home without calling anyone back. That night, Evelyn Harper called Alyssa, and her tone was calm and organized. She said Grant Wallace was preparing the demand letters, and he was contacting the buyer through available channels. She said if the cello could be recovered, they would recover it. If money changed hands improperly, they would trace it. Alyssa asked if Denise and Stanley could really face consequences, and Evelyn answered with certainty. Evelyn said people who steal from a child and celebrate it do not deserve gentle treatment. Alyssa sat in the dark living room after the call and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight. Then she stood up and began preparing for the next step, because she knew the fight was now official. Alyssa Morgan woke up to 3 missed calls from Denise Harper, and she did not answer. She listened to one voicemail, and Denise sounded sweet at first, then sharp, then angry. Denise said Alyssa was ruining the family, and Denise demanded Alyssa come over and apologize. Alyssa saved the message and forwarded it to Grant Wallace, because she was done debating feelings. That afternoon, Grant called Alyssa and spoke in a calm, precise tone. He said he had reviewed the trust documents with Evelyn Harper, and the language was clear. He said the cello was held for Hannah Morgan, and no one else had authority to sell it. Grant said he sent formal demand letters to Denise Harper and Stanley Harper, and another letter to the buyer, using the information he could trace. He said they requested immediate return of the instrument and a full accounting of the sale. Alyssa asked how he found the buyer without help, and Grant said people leave trails when they want to look important. He said there were contractors, neighbors, and social posts about the backyard project. He said a purchase that large often involves insurance and appraisal records, and he was already following leads. Alyssa felt sick hearing how easy it was for her parents to create this mess, and how hard it would be to clean. That evening, Brittany Harper sent a message pretending to be friendly. She said Alyssa should calm down and remember that family sticks together. Then, Brittany added one more line, asking if Alyssa could still help with pool expenses, because the budget was tight. Alyssa stared at the screen, and her hands went numb. She did not reply, because the message said everything. Hannah Morgan walked into the kitchen and saw Alyssa's face, and she asked if they were going to lose the cello forever. Alyssa knelt beside her and spoke slowly, keeping each sentence simple. Alyssa said the cello belonged to Hannah, and the law agreed. Alyssa said Evelyn Harper and Grant Wallace were working, and they would not stop. Hannah nodded, but her eyes stayed worried, because children do not trust promises when adults have failed them. Alyssa pulled her into a hug and said this time, "The adults who matter are not failing you." 2 days later, Grant Wallace called Alyssa Morgan during her lunch break. He said the buyer finally responded, and the response was not what Denise Harper expected. Grant explained that the buyer was a professional musician, and he claimed he purchased the cello in good faith. He provided a copy of the sale receipt, and the receipt listed Denise and Stanley as the sellers. Grant said the buyer was unsettled when he learned a child was involved, and he agreed to pause any transfer activity while lawyers reviewed the case. Alyssa felt relief, but it was cautious relief, because she knew her parents would lie until consequences cornered them. That evening, Denise called again, this time with panic under the anger. Denise demanded to know what Alyssa told people, and why strangers were calling about the cello. Alyssa did not answer the phone, but she saved every message. Stanley Harper sent a text saying they did what they had to do, and Alyssa should stop embarrassing them. Brittany Harper sent another message blaming Hannah Morgan, saying Hannah was too attached and too sensitive. Alyssa sat at the kitchen table, breathing slowly. Then she wrote a timeline of every interaction since the Saturday morning. She added details about the smell of paint, the lumber stacks, and the excavation markers. She included the exact words Denise used and the way Stanley avoided eye contact. Alyssa sent the timeline to Grant. Then she went to sit with Hannah. Hannah was practicing on a rented school instrument, and the sound was thinner, less familiar. Hannah stopped mid-phrase, and her eyes filled again. Alyssa told her it was not her job to be strong for adults. Alyssa said, being sad is honest, and honesty is not weakness. The next morning, Evelyn Harper called Alyssa with a firm voice. Evelyn said she would come in person soon, and she would not come alone. Evelyn said Denise and Stanley had ignored too many warnings, and the time for polite requests was over. Alyssa thanked her, and for the first time since the cello vanished, Alyssa felt something like control returning. Evelyn Harper arrived on a bright weekday morning, with Grant Wallace beside her. Alyssa Morgan met them at the curb, and Hannah Morgan stood behind Alyssa, quiet and tense. Evelyn looked at Hannah first, and her face softened for one beat. Then Evelyn turned toward the house, and her expression became steady, like stone. They walked to the door together, and Alyssa knocked once. Denise Harper opened the door with a smile that collapsed as soon as she saw Evelyn. Stanley Harper appeared behind Denise, stiff and pale. Brittany Harper came down the hallway a moment later, confused at first, then defensive. Evelyn stepped forward and spoke clearly, slow enough for every word to land. Evelyn said the cello was held in trust for Hannah Morgan, and Evelyn was the trustee. Evelyn said the sale was unauthorized, and it must be undone. Grant Wallace handed Denise and Stanley a packet, and he said they now had formal notice of their legal exposure. Denise tried to interrupt, saying Evelyn always favored Alyssa, and that the family needed improvements. Evelyn did not raise her voice, and she did not argue feelings. Evelyn said, "Stealing from a child is not improvement, it is cruelty." Stanley tried to claim it was only an instrument, and Brittany tried to claim it was for the good of the family. Evelyn looked directly at Brittany and said the good of the family begins with protecting the youngest. Grant said the buyer had been contacted, and the funds were being traced. Grant said if the cello was not returned voluntarily, the court would compel it, and additional consequences would follow. Denise began to cry, then stopped when she realized it was not working. She demanded Evelyn fix this and make Alyssa back down. Evelyn said no. Evelyn said Alyssa was doing what a parent must do, and Evelyn would not punish Alyssa for protecting Hannah. Hannah held Alyssa's hand tighter, and Alyssa felt her daughter shaking. Alyssa leaned down and whispered that none of this is your fault. Evelyn turned back to Denise and Stanley and said one last thing, calm and final. Evelyn said you do not get to celebrate betrayal and then ask for peace. After Evelyn Harper left, the house stayed quiet for 2 days. Then the panic arrived. Denise Harper called Alyssa Morgan 5 times, and each voicemail shifted from anger to pleading. Stanley Harper texted longer messages, trying to sound reasonable, but every line still blamed Alyssa for consequences. Brittany Harper sent a note about Jackson Harper, saying he was confused, and the adults should stop fighting. Alyssa saved everything, then sent it to Grant Wallace, because documentation was safer than arguing. Grant called that afternoon, and his voice stayed calm and sharp. He said the buyer had agreed to hold the cello and to cooperate with the legal process. He said the sale funds were being traced, and the trail pointed directly to the pool contractor. He also said Denise and Stanley had used their names on receipts, which made the case cleaner, not harder. Alyssa felt a strange relief, because truth is heavy, but it is solid. That night, Hannah Morgan asked if she would ever see her cello again. Alyssa sat with her at the kitchen table and kept her voice steady. Alyssa said the law was on their side, and Evelyn Harper would not let it go. Hannah nodded, then admitted she felt embarrassed at school because she was practicing on a borrowed instrument. Alyssa told her embarrassment belongs to the adults who stole, not to the child who loved music. The next morning, Denise showed up at Alyssa's door, unannounced, with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes. Alyssa did not invite her inside, and she kept the door mostly closed. Denise said she wanted to talk, and she wanted to fix things, and she did not understand why lawyers were involved. Alyssa said the reason was simple. Denise sold what was not hers. Denise tried to cry, then tried to bargain, offering to buy a different cello. Alyssa said no, because replacement is not the point. Ownership is. Denise left angry, and Alyssa watched her drive away. Hannah stood behind Alyssa, quiet and tense, and Alyssa placed a hand on her shoulder. Alyssa said the storm is loud, but the facts are louder, and that is why we keep going. Grant Wallace arranged a call with the buyer, and Alyssa Morgan joined from her kitchen table. The buyer spoke carefully, with a voice that sounded uncomfortable. He said he purchased the cello believing it was legitimate, because the sellers acted confident, and the price matched the appraisal he saw. He said the instrument was extraordinary, and he had already insured it and documented its markings. When he learned a child was involved, he felt sick, and he wanted to make it right. Grant thanked him and explained the trust details again, slow and clear. The buyer agreed to return as long as the process protected him legally, and as long as he could be reimbursed through the proper parties. Alyssa did not blame him, because the blame had a clear address. After the call, Hannah Morgan asked if she could speak to the buyer, just to say thank you. Alyssa said not yet, because adults would handle the adults, and Hannah should not carry that burden. Evelyn Harper visited that weekend, and she brought copies of the trust documents for Alyssa files. She sat with Hannah, held her hands, and told her the cello was always meant to be hers. Hannah cried quietly, and Evelyn did not rush her. Evelyn said some people confuse possession with ownership, and they learn the difference the hard way. Meanwhile, Denise Harper started telling relatives that Alyssa was stealing from her parents, and that Evelyn was being manipulated. Messages came in from cousins who had not called in years, asking why Alyssa was doing this. Alyssa replied once, in plain language, then stopped. She said her child property was sold without permission, and legal steps were required. She did not explain more, because people who prefer drama do not respect explanations. Grant filed additional paperwork to freeze any remaining funds connected to the sale, and he contacted the pool contractor about payment records. Brittany Harper called Alyssa late one night, and her voice was sharp with fear. Brittany said the pool could be stopped, and the deposit could be lost, and Alyssa needed to fix this. Alyssa said Brittany should ask herself why a child had to pay for an adult's project. Brittany hung up. Alyssa sat in silence afterward, then looked at Hannah practicing, and she felt her decision strengthen. She was not doing this to win, she was doing it to protect. The next week brought a shift that nobody could talk around. The pool work slowed, then stopped, and a contractor truck stopped appearing in the driveway. Denise Harper called again, and this time her voice sounded exhausted. She said the contractor was asking questions, and the bank was asking questions, and nothing was simple anymore. Alyssa Morgan listened to one message, then sent it to Grant Wallace without replying. Grant called later and explained that the financial trail was closing. He said Denise and Stanley had accepted money they had no right to take, and they used it immediately, which made their intent harder to deny. He said the return of the cello was being scheduled through proper channels, with documentation and custody records. Alyssa told Hannah Morgan the news after dinner, keeping the words gentle. Hannah stared for a moment, then covered her mouth, and her eyes filled. Alyssa held her close, and Hannah whispered that she thought nobody would care enough to fix it. Alyssa said, "That is why Evelyn Harper matters, and that is why boundaries matter." A few days later, Evelyn invited Alyssa to her home for tea, and they spoke about what happens next. Evelyn said accountability is not a moment, it is a pattern. She said Denise and Stanley would likely try to rewrite history, and Brittany would try to redirect blame, especially when Jackson Harper was disappointed. Alyssa said she would not argue with stories anymore. Alyssa said her priority was Hannah's safety and Hannah's future. When the cello finally returned, it arrived in a secure case, with paperwork attached, and a careful handoff arranged by Grant. Alyssa opened the case in the living room, and Hannah touched the wood like she was greeting a friend. The sound she pulled from the strings was steady and warm, and it filled the house with something that felt like justice. Alyssa watched her daughter play, and she felt anger fade into clarity. She knew her parents would call this harsh, and her sister would call it unfair. Alyssa accepted that. She had learned that protecting a child often looks like being the villain in someone else's story, and she was willing to pay that price. Once the cello was back in the house, Denise Harper stopped shouting and started pleading. She called Alyssa Morgan with a soft voice, saying she missed her granddaughter, and she wanted to make peace. Stanley Harper sent a message saying he felt attacked, and he asked Alyssa to stop involving lawyers. Brittany Harper tried to sound practical, saying the problem was solved and everyone should move on. Alyssa listened, and she heard the same pattern. They wanted relief, not responsibility. Grant Wallace warned Alyssa that Denise and Stanley might try to pressure Hannah Morgan directly, because children are easier to manipulate. Alyssa updated the school contact list again, and told the front office that only approved adults could speak with Hannah. Hannah asked if she had to be afraid, and Alyssa said no, but they had to be careful. A few days later, Denise left a gift basket on the porch with a note asking Hannah to call her. Alyssa photographed it, then returned it unopened. That night, Alyssa sat with Hannah at the table and explained boundaries in simple words. She said a gift does not erase harm, and an apology is only real when behavior changes. Hannah nodded and admitted she still felt angry, but also confused because she wanted grandparents like other kids. Alyssa told her wanting that is normal, and missing people is not proof they are safe. Evelyn Harper checked in by phone and reminded Alyssa to keep records, because the story would be rewritten soon. Evelyn said, "People who stole from a child will often claim the child is ungrateful once the child is protected." Alyssa believed her because she already saw it happening. When a cousin called to say Alyssa was being harsh, Alyssa answered calmly. She said the cello was held in trust for Hannah, and it was sold without authority, and the return happened only because legal action forced it. She said protecting a child is not harsh, it is required. The cousin went quiet, then ended the call. Alyssa felt tired afterward, but she also felt certain. Hannah practiced that evening with steady focus, and each note sounded like a promise that her life would not be decided by other people's greed. The pool project did not disappear quietly. Contractors talked, neighbors noticed, and questions spread through the family like smoke. Denise Harper told a version where she was misunderstood, and Stanley Harper claimed he thought the cello belonged to him. Brittany Harper told friends it was all Evelyn Harper's fault because Evelyn was controlling. Alyssa Morgan did not chase their stories. She stayed with facts. Grant Wallace filed the final paperwork to recover remaining funds and to document the unauthorized sale for the record. He explained to Alyssa that even if the cello was returned, the theft still mattered. Because patterns matter. Evelyn supported that decision because she wanted Hannah Morgan protected long after this crisis ended. One afternoon, Brittany showed up at Alyssa's job parking lot, waiting beside Alyssa's car. Her smile was thin, and her voice was tight. She said Alyssa ruined everything. And now Jackson Harper was being teased because the pool was unfinished. Alyssa asked Brittany if she hurt herself. Alyssa said Hannah lost her instrument, and Brittany complained about embarrassment. Brittany snapped that Alyssa always acted superior, and that Evelyn always favored Alyssa. Alyssa said favoritism had nothing to do with it, ownership did. Brittany demanded Alyssa tell Grant to stop because the financial pressure was crushing their parents. Alyssa said the pressure came from their choices, not from Alyssa. Brittany took a step closer and tried to lower her voice into a threat. Alyssa lifted her phone and said she would call security. Brittany stepped back, then left, furious. That evening, Alyssa told Hannah what happened, without adding fear, only clarity. Hannah said she did not want to visit that house again, and Alyssa said she did not have to. Evelyn Harper later told Alyssa she was reviewing her estate plans, because trust is earned, and some people had proven they could not be trusted. Alyssa felt a mix of sadness and relief, because family should be safe, but sometimes safety requires distance. As months passed, life became quieter, and the noise from Denise Harper faded into the background. Hannah Morgan grew stronger, not because she forgot, but because she understood. She practiced daily, and she started auditioning for youth orchestra programs again. Alyssa Morgan watched her daughter regain confidence, and it made every difficult step worth it. Denise tried one more time to regain access, sending a long letter filled with apology phrases, but it still avoided the core truth. Stanley added a short line asking for forgiveness, while still calling the legal action excessive. Brittany wrote nothing, but she sent messages through relatives, testing for weak spots. Alyssa did not respond because she refused to negotiate safety. Evelyn Harper invited Alyssa and Hannah to dinner at her home, and the atmosphere was warm and steady. Evelyn told Hannah that music is not only talent, it is discipline, and discipline is a kind of protection. Hannah smiled at that, because she understood what Evelyn meant. After dinner, Evelyn showed Alyssa the updated documents, in plain folders, clearly labeled. Evelyn said she adjusted the trust terms to strengthen Hannah's position, and she reduced certain privileges for Denise and Stanley. Evelyn did not sound angry. She sounded resolved. Alyssa asked if that felt harsh, and Evelyn said harsh would have been letting a child learn that theft has no consequences. Evelyn said love without boundaries becomes permission for cruelty. Alyssa drove home with Hannah in the passenger seat, and Hannah looked out the window, calmer than she had been in months. Hannah said she still felt sad sometimes, but she also felt proud that they stood up for her. Alyssa said that pride is earned, and she never wanted Hannah to lose it. When they arrived home, Hannah opened her case, touched the cello gently, and began to play. The notes filled the house, steady and warm, and Alyssa felt the story settle into its real ending. It was never about a pool, or money, or family gossip. It was about a child learning she mattered, and a mother proving it with action. Denise Harper did not accept distance. She tested it, again and again, with new methods that sounded polite. She sent a handwritten card to Hannah Morgan, asking for a fresh start, and she included a gift that felt like bait. Alyssa Morgan returned it unopened, and she recorded the date, because patterns matter. Stanley Harper tried a softer angle. He texted that he wanted to talk like adults, and he asked Alyssa to stop making it public. Alyssa answered once, in plain words, and said the truth became public when they sold a child property. Brittany Harper kept working through relatives, sending messages that framed Alyssa as cruel, and Evelyn Harper as controlling. A cousin suggested Alyssa should forgive, because everyone makes mistakes. Alyssa replied calmly, and said a mistake is forgetting a birthday, not selling a child instrument for cash. The next attempt came at school, when Denise tried to volunteer for an event, hoping she could approach Hannah quietly. The staff stopped her, because Alyssa had updated every permission list, and because the school took safety seriously. Denise left angry, and she called Hannah later from a different number. Hannah did not answer, but she saw the missed call, and her hands shook. Alyssa sat with her on the couch, and explained what was happening in clear, simple language. Alyssa said some adults try to bypass boundaries, because boundaries remove control. Alyssa said Hannah did not owe anyone access, and she did not owe anyone comfort. Hannah asked if it was wrong to feel sad, and Alyssa said sadness is normal, but sadness does not mean you return to harm. Evelyn called that evening, and her voice was steady, like a warm wall. She told Hannah she was proud of her courage, and she reminded Alyssa to keep doing the boring work, saving messages, taking notes, staying consistent. Alyssa promised she would. That night Hannah practiced for a long time, not as escape, but as grounding. Alyssa listened from the doorway, and each note sounded like a child reclaiming her own life. Summer arrived, and the pool behind Denise Harper House stayed unfinished, a silent monument to selfish choices. Denise and Stanley stopped calling as often, not because they understood, but because they ran out of leverage. Brittany kept her distance too, because she hated losing, and she hated being seen clearly. Alyssa Morgan focused on what mattered, her home, her work, and her daughter healing. Hannah Morgan entered a youth orchestra audition, and played with steady hands and a calm face. When the acceptance email arrived, Hannah stared at the screen, then laughed and cried at the same time. Alyssa held her and felt the weight of the past loosen. Evelyn Harper visited that weekend, dressed neatly, carrying a folder like she always did. She sat at the kitchen table and spoke with quiet certainty. She said the trust was updated, the documents were secure, and Hannah's future was protected more strongly than before. Evelyn did not talk about revenge. She talked about safety and truth, and the kind of love that defends a child. Hannah thanked her, then asked one question that Alyssa had not expected. Hannah asked why people would do that to family. Evelyn answered gently, and said some people confuse family with entitlement. She said you can love someone, and still refuse to be harmed by them. Alyssa watched Hannah absorb those words, and she saw maturity settle in, not forced, but earned. Later that night, Hannah opened her case, touched the cello wood softly, and began to play. The sound filled the house, warm and clear, and it felt like a new chapter. Alyssa understood the ending was not only about an instrument returning. It was about a child learning she mattered, and a mother proving it through action. It was about elders who chose greed, and a great-grandmother who chose protection. Alyssa knew the family story would split forever, but she accepted that. She would rather be judged for boundaries than praised for silence.